thank you guys so much for making the trip all the way out to Vegas. We are all so proud of what's going on in this event here. I think this is for you guys, and it gives us goosebumps when we think about the fact that we're just running a whole convention, a whole show just for you guys. It's long overdue, so we're so happy you guys came out. There is like a virtual all-star panel here of amazing, talented creatives. And just to kind of kick it off, I want to talk about what these guys have done and what they're still doing. So you've got Neil here, who is always driving kind of linear directed stories, and Rue is doing something similar. And we've got Rex, where the gamer is part of the story. You've got, I can't see, Will, who's doing a branching story you saw with Until Dawn. And you've got Tim, who his last project in Broken Age is telling the same story from two different perspectives. So I think we've got a lot of great ways to talk about how storytelling works in games. And my job here as moderator is basically to stay out of the way of these guys and let them talk, let them argue amongst themselves, let Tim make his stand-up comic routines, and we can go from there. So I'm just going to kick it off really quick by introducing everyone. You all know Neil Druckmann from Naughty Dog, Uncharted, The Last of Us. And I'm convinced that part of my punishment for the privilege of being in this industry for so long is to have to pronounce Rue's last name. So Rue Weerasuriya, is that close? That's pretty good. So from Ready at Dawn, currently making The Order, 1886. And Rex Crowle from Media Molecule, who has worked on Tearaway. He showed you the new PS4 version of Tearaway today. And Will Byles, the creative director at Supermassive, working on Until Dawn. One of the things, I thought that was one of the highlights of the show for me, hearing the crowd scream, high jump, do whatever. I think that was awesome. So the first horror party game, I'm excited about that. And I told Tim before the show, if I listed every game he worked on, then the panel would be over. We'd be done. So again, Broken Age is the latest, and I think there's a lot of insight he can add to telling stories from different perspectives. So with that, I'm going to kind of throw it out to the panel here and see who wants to bite first. Who wants to tell me where your inspiration comes from when it comes to stories in games? Who wants to go first? And if no one says, I'm going to pick somebody.
Hello. Okay. My mic's working and my voice is still working, so that's good. I think for me, I've always been captivated by little worlds, little places. Like when I was a kid in a train set, or any sort of small little world that I wanted to climb into. Even if it was under a rock in my backyard and you pick it up and there's bugs down there, I just want to go into that world. So for me, it always starts with the world, and then I start thinking about characters that would be in that world, and then start thinking about how they would interact and what they want, and that's pretty much how the inspiration of the story comes to me.
Very cool. Very cool.
And then I just steal from movies also.
Well, similarly to what Tim said, creating worlds is actually, I think, in the foremost thing that we're trying to do. But for me, actually, it's always been people. Humanity is one of the most amazing things to look at purely because of what we've been able to accomplish. And people have a tendency to inspire all the time. And creating stories, creating The Order, it was about actually telling, the stories of human beings. And you see things that you see every day, you see things in history, and they keep on inspiring you because there's nothing better than the things that we've done and what we've been able to do in the past.
The one thing I could add, obviously there's movies and books and things that have moved us as kids and then as adults, and you're trying to recapture some of that. So you start from that sort of place, but then I try to find what personally moves me. What is the story trying to say that philosophically I agree with? And with something like The Last of Us is when my wife and I were thinking of having a kid and then had a kid during production, a lot of that got into the writing. And I think that helped make it more personal for me, and hopefully that it transitions through the medium into the people playing it.
Okay, and for me, obviously Until Dawn is a horror, so it's kind of like every horror film ever made is part of the inspiration. But there's a really big thing as well, which is in my head now. I have this model that, with the PS4, now, inside that PS4, when you put a branching story into something like that, basically it's like a multiverse. And because wherever you go, it's always going to branch off down a different route. The story's going to change, and it's going to become a different story and your story. So even though we have set up a kind of a series of events, the actual thing is just like, for me, it's like magic. It's kind of like, there's a box, and there's this entire set of possibilities in there, and it's all still in there. It's like fate. And once you get that in your head, it's amazing where you can go with it.
Sorry. Well, because I'm kind of a bit of a charlatan on this panel. I'm just an artist that's trying to make some stories up. But I come from a very... Okay, sorry, guys. I'm going... so I tend to... I guess it's kind of similar to Tim's, except I can draw. but he can write... he can make people laugh. So... So I tend to doodle in my sketchbooks and just keep drawing until I see some characters that I'm interested in, and then try and figure out what other characters might be interested in them and whether there's some relationships that might form. And then once you've done that, maybe try and create a little world that they could all inhabit, and particularly if it's a world that has quite different kind of similarities and differences from our own world. I'm not very good with reality, so I like to try and kind of twist reality a little bit, kind of have a believable core, and then go a little bit stranger. So yeah, it all comes off the page of a sketchbook, really.
Let me add one thing. One thing we've been talking to kind of an initial inspiration, but there's a lot of inspiration that happens on writing. The way we write our games is. There's no initial script. We write as we make the game and as we figure out certain sections. So a lot of being surrounded by such talented artists, like you're seeing an environment and you're trying to imagine, okay, how would the characters react to this environment, to this situation, and that informs the writing a lot of times. Or you hear a piece of music you just got from the composer, and that gives you a certain tone, which again affects the writing. So a lot of the inspiration comes throughout production as we work on the game.
That's a perfect segue into, I think we should roll that video with Troy and Ashley. Neil, do you want to set this video up a little bit? Because it leads right to what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Just say we're going to the laptop.
Is this really all they had to worry about?
If you could pause it for a second. This is the part
really
in The Last of Us where Ellie has run off, and she feels, even though she's bonded with Joel on such a personal level, he hasn't reciprocated that. And it's really about this personal conflict between these two characters, and for the first time expressing what they really want in the story. And on the page, I was pretty proud of what we had, and I thought it worked pretty well in my mind. But then, we got it on his feet, and it was great. And this is just a point of where the interpretation of another artist, and in this case, Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, who's sitting right there, so you could bug her afterwards. She loves hugs, so make sure you hug her. And the story, again, took shape, and some of the dialogue changed, and the physicality they brought to the scene took it to this other place that worked much better than anything that was initially written. And again, once the scene is captured, it gets to animators, who then it's another set of interpretation, and music is added. So the storytelling never stops with the writing. It keeps going until someone tells you to stop and you have to ship the game. So here's this one step.
Is this really all they had to worry about? Boys, movies, deciding which shirt goes with which skirt. It's bizarre.
Get up. We're leaving. Come on.
And if I say no?
Do you even realize what your life means? Huh? Running off like that, putting yourself at risk? It's pretty goddamn stupid.
Well, I guess we're both disappointed with each other then.
What do you want from me?
Admit that you wanted to get rid of me the whole time.
Tommy knows this area
Oh,
better
fuck
than...
that.
Well, I'm sorry. I trust him better than I trust myself.
Stop with the bullshit. What are you so afraid of? That I'm gonna end up like Sam? I can't get infected. I can take care of myself.
How many close calls have we had?
Well, we seem to be doing all right so far.
And now you'll be doing even better with Tommy.
I'm not her, you know.
What?
Maria told me about Sarah.
Ellie?
And
You are treading on some mighty thin ice here.
I'm sorry about your daughter, Joel. But I have lost people too.
You have no idea what loss is.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
You're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad. And we are going our separate ways.
So fascinating, obviously, heavy emotional scene. Neil, do you mind talking a bit about what you thought you were going to get out of that scene and how it kind of evolved? The multiple times you went through that in the mocap stage.
What do you hope to get out of the scene? You hope it would work and it comes off as natural. And we did a few takes that felt like they were good and there was some honesty behind it, but it sometimes felt a little forced. And actually, the more takes we did, the more kind of forced it felt, and we had to take a break. And we kind of just stopped for a while, and we took a 15-minute break and just talked about the scene. And I wish Ashley was talking about this, because when we came back, there was just a different energy, and I think some of the frustration of us not being able to hit the scene came through with their acting, and that shove, that's not in the script. And just all of a sudden that jolted something within Troy, and his performance it went to this other place, and the scene became a lot more emotional, but more importantly, it became a much more believable and honest.
So, Rue, would you like to show the scene that you brought along and
Sure.
talk about how we kind of the experience you had in the mocap studio as well?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I'll set it up for you guys. I mean, of course, the game not being out, we can't show much right now. Well, don't want to spoil it for you. But the interesting thing for us was very much, getting into PlayStation 4, trying to figure out really where we wanted to take what people have done before us. I mean, talking about having Neil, right next to me, it's no pressure at all. But what Naughty Dog have been able to accomplish and really show what we'll be capable of doing as as developers for games was quite amazing, since the days of Uncharted and all that. So we talked about inspiration before, so I just want to add a slight thing. One of the biggest inspirations we have as developers is other developers. These guys here have been part of our lives for a long, long time. I mean, Tim, seriously, we dreamt of doing these things when some of us here, I'm not going to point fingers again, but some of us here were inspiring us every single day by what they wrote. So we came into this trying to figure out what else can we do. Not just stay where we are, but where else can we go? And it came in the form of what I said before, we got inspired by history, we got inspired by humanity, what they went through, but it was also interesting to try and tell a story where there wasn't just a protagonist, where there were multiple. And it was really hard to figure out how to balance different characters in a single scene. It's one thing when we play one against the other, you can really play, somebody who's really strong against somebody weak or something like that, but then you put 5 of these characters in a single scene, they have a little time on screen, and how does everybody portray who they are in a short scene? What we're going to show you here is actually from the demo that we've brought here from the airship Agamemnon. Let's kick it off.
Is this what you would call reasonable? We could not have foreseen these circumstances, Master. Your mission to Whitechapel was to remain covert. I have received word of numerous casualties and reports of destruction to the London hospital. And now this!
I intend to stand by my word. I alone will assume responsibility for all the consequences that may befall us.
Sebastian, you do understand. There is little I can do to protect you from the wrath of the Lord Chancellor or of the Order.
Your father will see reason. Right now, our concern should be finding the other device before it detonates.
Good night, your assistance. We must all hurry off the ship before things get worse.
Sir Lucan will escort you and see to the evacuation. We must resume our pursuit.
Surely this is a situation for all hands. You do not intend to stay aboard.
We will join you as soon as we can.
Izzy, see to these people, then head to the cockpit.
No, I'm coming with you.
Izzy, you need to find Lafayette and get off this ship. Your brother charged me to bring you back safely. Do this for me.
We need weapons. There's a guard station nearby. We can avail ourselves of the company's arms.
So obviously that's a incredibly complex scene and a very tense moment. I mean, how do you pull all those emotions out? I mean, there were what, 4 or 5 speaking roles in that short scene. Talk about how that went for you.
It was hell. It was complete hell. In the beginning, it was really like one of those moments where you go, all right, not only you have to have this, working with everybody knowing their lines, their pacing, and where they need to end up, because we wanted to shoot it a certain way. I had cameras in my head where I thought, okay, this is going to be really cool if we shoot this conversation from here. But then actors do things on stage, just like Neil said, that you don't expect. One of the awesome things that might be so subtle in here, but for me personally sells the scene, is Isabeau, Lady Igraine, is in the backdrop multiple times in the scene. And at one point, she's observing her direct superior being literally chastised by somebody else. And if you look at her reaction, she's right there for a moment, and then they keep on arguing, and she passes right in front of the camera. The camera was not supposed to have her in front. We were going to just delete her off the scene so that she didn't have to. But just her passing, turning her head, looking at them as they're fighting, kind of gets you that moment where you feel like you're in there. Because she's there, you're in there. If you were just having the 2 people in front of you just arguing, you kind of feel like detached from everything that's happening. But bringing those little things, that happen on stage because they really didn't follow exactly the cues, but they decided to do something else, builds on what you write, builds on what you do, builds on what you're trying to tell as a story. And really the tricky part for us was the fact that having 5 actors, 5 of our main cast actually be there, and trying to do all of this. I like to do everything in one take, which is really stupid sometimes. But just to carry the emotion, just to carry that through, just so that you don't have to cut through it. And it was amazing to see that this was literally probably take 3 or 4, but they just went through it, and we didn't have to stop. They just started, they just went through it. They were not exactly hitting their marks. They were taking some liberties. They were saying things that were not exactly what the script was saying, but everything was right because they were in the middle of it. And even Mallory walking away from, when they're arguing, Mallory walks away from Lucan. That wasn't scripted the way it was. They were supposed to finish that argument, and then Lucan was supposed to go, and Mallory followed to basically get the Lord out of the airship. Guess what? Percival decided to just dismiss Lucan as he was talking and literally walked off. And I was like, that's awesome. We got to keep that. And I mean, seriously, that just happened. And that made that scene amazing because the guy who was playing Lucan didn't expect it. Yeah. So his reaction is actually genuine. He just went, what the hell, you're walking out on me? and those moments you can write sometimes. You just have to hope that your actors are that good, and they were, to give you something that in your head you could never imagine.
That's how my wife ends every argument. It's good. So it's normal. I get it. So, hey, Will, do you think you want to run the clip that you brought along and talk about that scene?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sorry, nearly put your coffee off there. I'll just set it up a little. So in Until Dawn, because we've got so much branching going on, we had to shoot things in a slightly different way. We couldn't just do a scene and that would be it. The whole of Until Dawn is this kind of flux between actors acting whilst you're in locomotion, reacting to conversations. Conversations have choices, so a second part of a conversation might go wildly different, and then that might branch off somewhere else, and a whole bunch of other stuff can kick off. So it's not like we can do a scene like normal. We have to do it it's not a modular way, but we have to do it, like I say, in a kind of state of flux. So what I'll show you here is one of the characters, Ashley, and the first thing I'll show you, and this is from her own performance, from the actress's performance, Galadriel Steinman. We just got her to be kind of aware of her surroundings and to be frightened. And then we sort of set up with all of our guys, our really clever guys at the studio, a kind of contextual awareness. So that's the very first thing you'll see, is just her. This is just live. When you're playing it, you just stop. The camera will cut to a close-up, and this is what she does when stuff happens. And then that'll just lead into a conversation, and again, there'll be a choice, and you'll see how that changes through. Okay.
Hello?
Just because he's class
Oh God. Chris, it's from last year.
Mike is my man.
Hey,
Stupid prank.
not anybody's man.
Whatever you say, darling.
This is a little uncomfortable, huh?
I've never seen this video. She's so excited. And alive. Oh, jeez.
Wow. Forgot you were such a willful participant.
Yeah, well, we all were.
You look like you were enjoying yourself.
I didn't know what was going to happen. It was a dumb prank, Chris, and maybe we shouldn't have done it, but it's not like I personally made her run into the woods.
Kind of splitting hairs a little.
Look, she chose to do that. It's not our fault she did that.
You guys.
Chris!
Put her down.
What is going on?
Ash, slow down, okay?
I can't handle this ghost and these videos and everything just flying
calm down.
around.
Listen to me for a second.
What? Calm down? Why should I calm down, Chris? I am freaking
This
out
has
right
got
now.
to be someone messing with us. Think about it. Ghosts don't hook up video cameras. They don't play games.
Then who would set this all up? Seriously, I'm asking.
I don't know. Maybe the same person who tied you up and killed Josh?
Yeah, right.
The same person who might have Sam right now.
Maybe you're right.
I wish I wasn't.
So, Will, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the process that went on there and how you drove that emotion out of those guys.
So, I mean, obviously, the key thing is to have really good actors. That's a really, really key thing. The script we have to go through is fairly huge, so they need to know it. They obviously need to learn it, and they need to understand where their emotion was left off before they get to the next point of the conversation or the next part of the branch. And it's sometimes, you know, it's a hard thing to kind of wind somebody back, especially, I mean, like, you know, when actors get so kind of deep into a character and the emotions are flowing and it's all going on, and you can just go right back to where you were there and then go a little bit of a different direction. So it's hard. It's just, you know, it's a lot of detail and a lot of spreadsheets. A lot of our scripts are done in Excel, so that's what they don't like.
So I think I want to switch gears a little bit for Rex and Tim here and talk about, you know, so many of the games you've done, Tim, and with Tearaway, Rex, the choice of style for storytelling was so interesting. I mean, Rex, I'm going to hit you up first. You know, what inspired you to kind of create Tearaway and decide that you wanted the gamer to be a huge part of the story? What inspired you to go that direction?
I mean, I think a lot of it comes from being inspired actually from the team that were making the game. And we have quite an experimental process, quite a sort of game jam style process in the studio. And aside from kind of what I wanted to get out of it, of talking specifically about the Vita version of Tearaway, of wanting to unite a digital world with the real world, of being able to sort of push your fingers into it, was just allowing all of the team to like come up with their own ways to bridge this divide between digital and real. I've actually got a video which we could show. It's the second one along on that other way. No, the other one. The other second along. No, not that one.
Spoilers.
Didn't happen. That one, yeah. So
I've been so trying to.
What was it set? So the kind of brief for the game was to try and create a world that you felt in your hands and really brought the player into it so that they become a protagonist in the game. And we often do little kind of show and tell sessions in the studio and see what people have been coming up with. And this is from a moment where one of the programmers, Omar, he was experimenting with facial recognition. So this is almost like our mocap studio right here. We've sort of cut out all of that complicated stuff that we wouldn't know how to do. Yeah, exactly. And just got straight in with doing it ourselves. So if we could run this one.
Plumbing in the Sony face detection codes.
When you lose a baby, it's hard, isn't it?
So I've been testing using the face detection to when I roll my head.
So it's using the front camera?
Yeah, it's using the front camera and seeing my face and evaluating the roll of my face and rotate the camera accordingly.
It's amazing.
And
it really captures his essence.
this very important door opens up when you smile.
It just freaks out.
Oh wow! Hang on, your smile is doing that.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's a bit dodgy. But
It only recognises Omar's smile though.
Oh my god, that's
but that's kind of the idea.
that's very cool.
So it does, there's a lot of issue, but it's kind of here to exhibit the design and technical issue and see how we can kind of design around that, maybe use that for things. There's other parameters that the library gives us, such as we can have a glass door that only open if you have glasses, or
So the best stuff you see in there.
Have to wear beards to open the
exactly. Yeah, so it's.
That's not bad.
It could be a door girl.
We could do special things, but there would be a bit.
It could be a girl. It could be a girl door.
It can be a girl door.
Only open if you're a girl. Or so I guess that's a bit. I'm kind of trying to get that in a state enough that it's kind of working in the game without breaking the rest of the game. It's very experimental, but maybe you can find used to that.
Well, that's great. It's hard to.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. Let's do that. Anything more over here?
is very slow.
So it's weird. My video kind of applauded itself. You know, and obviously, like you see these experiments, you think, what the hell are we going to do with this? And we experimented a lot with that tech, and it was too kind of glitchy to actually be able to put it in a game. You'd need like a studio lighting rig around you to really work properly. But it made us think about how our faces became important and the expressions that we were pulling while playing the game. And we wondered whether we could actually do an even less sort of technical version of that and just show the player their own face in the game, so that you feel integrated into the cutscenes, so that instead of kind of pressing the skip button, you're acting along, and it's kind of up to the player whether they want to really go with this or not. You know, and some people would like do mad things of actually kind of dressing themselves up or putting makeup on, or you know, kind of really trying to become part of it, and other people kind of not so much. But yeah, that was one of the key ways we tried to bring the paper world and the player, sort of reunite them.
Thanks, Rex. So Tim, as the only non-first party studios member here on the stage, can you tell me a little bit about again what inspired you with Broken Age, and you know what inspired you to tell the story from two different perspectives, and just kind of tell me a little bit how the game works, because I'm not so familiar, quite frankly.
Well, thanks for playing. Another way that besides the environmental inspiration, that ideas come together is often you'll have a piece of an idea in your head, like sometimes for 15 years, like Brutal Legend, just floating around, but it's not fully formed, and then it just bumps into this other idea you have in your head, and you're like, oh wait, that's ready. That's an idea. And so for years, I think I was watching King Kong, and I was watching Fay Ray all tied up and waiting for the monster, for King Kong to come and take her. And I was like, just what, you know, you can't help but think what you would do in these situations, and you'd be like, I wonder if she could just kick him in the nose, you know, just fight their way out of that sacrifice. What would happen to you if you were going to be sacrificed, but you chose to fight the monster and leave? And so that story about that of Vela in Broken Age was just like 8 years or something in my head. Wow. And then I also love just stories of for some reason, people isolated with technology. Like there's a movie, Silent Running, old 70s science fiction. The guys were alone on a spaceship, just dealing with the robots there, and just being on an automated, being taken care of by robots and stuff. It's just, I always liked that story, and I was thinking of ways to work that. And then when I kind of flashed on what's essentially like the last scene in Act 1 of the game, I was like, oh wait, these would actually support each other. These stories would actually really enhance each other and interact in a way that would be pretty cool.
Very cool. It was almost like a happy accident how that worked out. Yeah?
Well, yeah. I mean, and it's come, like for me, like the tool I always use is free writing, which is just to sit there with an empty notebook and just write, and you can't let yourself stop writing for just 2 minutes or half an hour or an hour, sometimes just writing, and I hope no one ever finds these notebooks, because they're really ridiculous. They're just like talking about my breakfast and blah, 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 blah. And then I start talking about the game, and it's kind of helpful in the same way that when you talk to another person, you kind of have ideas that you wouldn't have had when you're just locked in your room by yourself. And sometimes the writing will help. And it was like the first day I sat to work on Broken Age, I didn't know what the game was going to be, because I wanted to document this for our documentary. Like, how do you make up ideas? And so I just sat there and started writing. And it was something about writing about, like, going over my head of all the ideas I've always wanted to do but never done, and then seeing how two of them fit together. That just kind of like actual light bulb moment.
Very cool. One of the things that personally fascinates me in the games that all of you guys make is just the process of character development in general. And you think about some of the old school games. There wasn't any character development for Mario, for example. You just knew you had to save a princess, and that was it. But so it was about creating a game mechanic, and then the very loose story was built around it. But so many of the games that we see today, the whole game is the story. You obviously have to work game mechanics in there, but can you guys talk about how you know what your game wants to feel like, but maybe sometimes does the character development in the early stages of the game almost get in the way of introducing those game mechanics? Does anyone want to tackle this convoluted question I just attempted to ask?
Well, I mean, if someone else wants, I just talking, so
Go
I feel
for
like
it.
a hogging thing. Sometimes I always feel like story and gameplay and character are like all the same thing. Like they all mesh together, and they push and pull on each other in a lot of ways. But I feel like it's this one puzzle you're trying to solve all together, and they all have to work, and they all have to support each other. But it gets interesting sometimes because we were making Brutal Legend, and we had Eddie with an axe. Like I knew he had to have a broad axe, but then people were like, "We need a ranged weapon. Let's give him a gun." And I was like, it's just not in character for Eddie to go around shooting a gun. It just doesn't seem very heavy metal. Like, it didn't seem, I mean, there's some guns in the covers of heavy metal albums, but it's more swords and stuff. So I was like, it just doesn't feel right. And that's, someone came up with the idea of like, let's have his guitar be like a ranged weapon, and you can use it that way. And so, but I think it was frustrating for some of the designers because they're like, we have to give him a gun. Come on, we need to have a ranged weapon. It doesn't matter, the character shouldn't be affecting this gameplay decision. But I feel like if you just spend a little more time thinking about it, you can come up with a solution for both, a solution that supports your character and supports your gameplay, for sure.
Very cool. Anyone else want to comment in that space?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing, and again, it really depends massively on the sort of storytelling you're doing. But what we seem to find now is that we have, like a 9-hour game, and a story for 9 hours is a lot more, obviously, than a feature film of 90 minutes and stuff. And so we kind of see it more like a season on TV, like a box set, So you have this really large overarching arch for the whole thing, and then these smaller ones, and then all the character arcs as well. And something again that we're trying to do is all the characters have a starting point, and we make sure that you kind of get that very, very early on. And then those characters and their relationships can change depending on, again, what you do. So it's quite interesting watching, and we had to make sure when we wrote for this, that you allowed a character arc to go one way and to go in an entirely different way and see the difference in those relationships. And it's great. I mean, a really good story is about what characters do. It's their journey. And getting that to come across, I think, is really important.
I've mentioned this before, but when we were making The Last of Us, the original arc for Ellie was that she was a lot more innocent at the beginning of the story. And over the course of the game, as Joel is training her, she wouldn't kill someone until the very end of the story, and that will kind of change who she was. But as we're making an action game, a stealth action game where you're sneaking around and you have to kill people and take cover, and on a high level, from a story point, we want you to bond. It's all about this relationship between Joel and Ellie. And if Ellie's just hiding around and not engaged in what are some of your core mechanics, then emotionally you weren't buying into who she is and why Joel isn't teaching her to use a gun and all this stuff. So we had to actually rethink her character and add all these new systems for her, so she would take cover right next to you, and then added this animation of how Joel put his arm around her. But likewise, we decided to give her a gun much earlier so she could cover you. And all of a sudden, just through systems, we found that the player was starting to rely on Ellie. And then when she wasn't around, they were missing her. So just through those gameplay mechanics, we're building those bonds, and those what was used to fight the story all of a sudden became a supportive mechanism for it.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think what Tim said about like everything coexisting is absolutely true. I mean, the thing is, when you write something and when you write a story, you would want it to go exactly the way you have it in your head. But the reality, it gets better because of the things that come in, throughout development. You start with one thing, you think it's the best thing that you can do, then suddenly a design mechanic changes the way your character acts, and like Neil described, suddenly it becomes more than what you could ever imagine. I'll give you a perfect example. Like, we were, in the airship that we shown, we're going in there. You're supposed to protect mankind in so many ways, as a hero. And here you have Galahad going there to, stop a rebel plot. And I was arguing that, well, he's going in there, so he should be really kind of like careful about who he attacks, who he kills, and all that stuff. And then the argument came back was like, well, okay, we have these mechanics that we want to use, and we want to do certain things with him. And I was kind of fighting it, but at the same time, in my head, I was going back and thinking, actually, that's true. This is a guy who's lived for long enough that the ends justify the means. Are you willing to kill somebody, for example, to do what you're supposed to do? So suddenly, from the narrative of him being a lot more protective from, on the side of mankind, suddenly it became about, no. If he's somebody who's actually gone through this 100 times over the last few 100 years because he's lived that long, would you really care enough to basically, be more forceful to make sure that you could, that the end would justify the means, that you could get what you wanted out of it. And suddenly, I started thinking about the character as being a lot more, I think, I want to say, detached from humanity than what he was. And that helped also write part of who he became, which is that he's got this detachment that you see through his life, where you see that he's doing what he's supposed to do, but there's something brewing inside him. And all of those things sometimes are just guided by the fact that somebody challenges what you have as a preconceived notion in your head.
Thanks, Drew. Rex?
I mean, something that's quite challenging to us at Molecule and the games that we've made is that the central character, we don't know how people are going to customize and change them. So it becomes quite a challenging thing to really make sure that players really care about that character, because they don't always have a lot of backstory. And we try and give them a purpose, like the messenger in Tearaway has this message in their head, and it's very sort of bold and clear. There's that detail there, but we have to go through add lots of little features of just making sure that the character is looking out at you a lot. In LBP, when every time Sackboy dies, he sort of falls out of the screen almost, and there's a tiny moment where he's just for a couple frames just looking at you before falling out, and you just feel like, what have I done? This is, and obviously we can't sort of overwork those things, but just those split seconds, I think, do make all the difference of just feeling that bond with the character that you're controlling.
Great, thanks. We have about 15 minutes left, I believe. I want to give you guys in the audience a chance to ask questions to all these guys on the panel, and I honestly just want to take the pressure off myself for thinking of new questions. So does anyone have questions that they want to ask? I think these mics are live. If you want to go up to the mic that's in the center of the two aisles here, we can handle it that way. Why don't you go ahead over here?
Hi. I was just wondering how you guys, what the thought process is in advancing story through either gameplay or a cutscene. How do you decide which one of those you choose?
We usually try to find a cutscene for us is as much we think of it as a last resort. So how much can we put in gameplay? How much can we systemically have the dialogue work within the game? And then there's just certain moments that either wouldn't work at all during gameplay, or there'll be a lot lessened by just removing some of that control. And then we use kind of cinematic language to get close up, so you could see a certain expression that you wouldn't catch if you had the gameplay camera, or get a certain nuance of performance. And we find by doing that, actually, and kind of alternating between those two states, is even then when you go back to gameplay and you have a lot more in-game dialogue, you can picture those same expressions, those same nuances that you saw in the cutscene. So there's sort of pacing to it of how long have we spent without seeing a character up close. Yeah. So.
There are a lot of people in line, and there's no way we're getting through all these, so let's go rapid fire as much as we can.
Sure. Thank you guys, first of all, for being here. I think personally you guys are like the Pixar of video game storytelling. It's amazing. My question specifically is for Neil. My favorite game personally has been The Last of Us, and the reason for that, like I'm sure a lot of people here, is how emotional it made me feel. You really felt for those characters, and of course Troy and Ashley were such a huge part of that, and the performance was incredible. So thank you guys so much. I was wondering how, I know you said the story evolves a lot as you go through the process. Did you have that particular ending though? Was that always in mind, or did that change at any point as well?
Spoilers. I always knew that Joel would lie to Ellie at the end, but the initial draft of it was that Ellie believed him, and they kind of went off to this town, and it was much more hopeful. But as we're approaching kind of capturing that scene, and Ellie has been through so much, and you got to see her be so smart, and she has such a good bullshit detector with everybody that she comes across, that it just didn't feel real anymore. It didn't feel honest. And then like a week before we were capturing it, I rewrote the scene, and I guess it became a lot more ambiguous to people of what happens in it, but that's how it shifted.
Thank you.
Okay. This one's mostly directed at Tim, but other guys can chime in. It just seems, I've heard so many people say that humor is hard to pull off in games because it's hard in general. But I'm just wondering, I see a lot of games where you can see their attempts at humor, but it just doesn't land. Tim, a lot of your games end up coming out the other way where a lot of the jokes land and are favorably remembered. When you're writing it and reading over this, how are you thinking about how the joke is actually going to be delivered and land with the humor in the story when you have to work with animators and artists and everything else that goes involved into a game that maybe other mediums don't have to worry about?
Oh, well, thanks. And I mean, one of the great things about collaborating with people is that everybody adds something to it. So I might write something that I think is funny. And I mean, sometimes you struggle with it, but a lot of times, you know, obviously the actor will add stuff and make it come to life and make it funnier. And then the animators will add just a little twitch to their face and just make something, make a laugh that wasn't there before. And sometimes it's a visual gag the artist will do, or a lot of times it's just an audio touch. And so that's the exciting thing about group collaborative art, is that you'll do your best, but then everybody has a chance to kind of like, make it just a little bit better. And with comedy, I think that's especially true. Yeah.
I think a lot of the comedy can also come from the players, particularly in like multiplayer games like Gang Beasts or LBP or stuff, of just how characters are interacting, and it's very hard to write that, but you try and set things up, set characters up for the fall.
Like if you can give the player comedy tools
Yeah.
that make them feel like they're,
Exactly.
I was smart Alec who came up with that funny line,
Yeah.
or I chose to do that little, put my arms in the air as anyway.
Totally.
I just was wondering, when you're coming back to Grim Fandango, if you found yourself wanting to like change things, or if it just sparked ideas for sequels, or if it was just like you're like, yes, I can just leave this be.
Not really. Not with that particular game, because we fussed over that a lot, and so I was like, I don't want to open this. There's like a couple of little like just polished things that I really wanted to do the first time that I just like hoping that we could like repolish, but to open that up, and even to open it up for a sequel, it's like, I don't want to spoil the ending to my game, but even though it is like 100 years old, and we ended that game in such a way that I was like, that's really hard to do a sequel to. That's really tough. But so not particularly in that one. Yeah. Cool. Answer the question.
This is a general question for anybody, but it's really directed more towards the linear guys. Are there ever any moments, because Neil talked about the cutscenes being the last resort, are there any moments you ever kind of come back and think, we can do that playable? Because I know The Last of Us was originally supposed to end with a cutscene, and you guys said, no, let's do gameplay, and I think it was a lot more rewarding because it led to many great conversations. But are these moments where you think gameplay can certainly strengthen something, and how hard is that in development to go back on everything and say, well, let's change things?
Yeah, absolutely. The ending was originally a pretty long cutscene, but we had this one designer, Peter Field, who has since left to go to Media Molecule. But he would, on a regular basis, bug me and say, I feel like this should be playable. And when Joel's carrying Ellie, we have to see, and you have to play that, and it'll mirror the beginning of what you did with Sarah. And we would kind of brainstorm about it, and it didn't feel right, and like, because you have to kind of imagine both versions in your mind, and then go high level and try to imagine the player going through that experience with a cutscene and going through that experience as it being playable, and you have to be honest with yourself, okay, which one is stronger? And eventually, we talked about it so much, we came upon this design that felt like, you know what, that would be a lot better as a playable sequence. So let's scrap all this animation that the animators have done, and even the scene that we've captured, we were able to use bits of it, but you make those sacrifices in hopes of making a better experience.
Thank you.
This is just addressed to everyone.
I was just going to say, I think that the whole kind of paradigm of gameplay cutscene, as technology is getting better, I think there's an idea that you can kind of mix those things together now. So now, we try and, I think everybody hates just a cutscene for the, for the expositional kind of way that it's used. But having a cutscene where exposition is there, but you're still involved and you have, you still have agency and you have connection, that's definitely what we're trying to do and push forward. That you never get just a cutscene.
Okay. So I'm just wondering, how exactly do you guys all deal with writer's block when it hits? I've always been stuck with that, so.
You drink a lot.
Never happened. Never happened. Sounds like a joke. Alcohol, sometimes, I don't want to advise children out there, but it does work.
He's right. He's totally right. No, but it does. It's not just that, but you find your avenues like, somewhere else. I think writing is just part of the way your brain has to, get something out there. It's like, it can be just, you want to write a story, you get a block. Personally, I go out and play sports. There's certain things that I've done since I was a kid. So if I have a writer's block, I usually find another way to get something out where it's just like, going to, doing something else, playing music, whatever it is. But that same vehicle that you used to write does so much for you, like, whether you're a sportsman, whether you're a musician or anything like that. So finding that avenue, for me at least personally, gets me to that point where I think I don't have it there, but then my mind does something else for a little while. And just doing that is enough to basically get everything flowing again. And you come back to it and it's like, why in the world couldn't I think of it before? And all it is not that you were that dumb before you just did something else, but it's just that it's fatigue. Mental fatigue, it happens to everybody, just like, physical fatigue happens to everyone.
Yeah, and I like joking about booze and stuff. It's really, it's that, because one of the times the worst enemy is just your own brain, and you're thinking too much, and you're editing yourself too much, and you're worrying too much about doing it wrong. And so anything you can do to kind of get past that, and that's what the free writing is for me, is that you start, like I'll try and I'll like, okay, I have to get this done. I'm just gonna write a crappy version of it. And just writing a really bad version of it just turns off that editor in my head. And then I start writing it and it's so bad, I'm like, oh, I gotta rewrite this now. And then I rewrite it. And so write a bad version first. That's what I would say.
So this is aimed at everybody. You all make different variety of games. Is there any special way that you approach writing the dialogue for your characters? Like, I'm sure there's some trick that you guys use, so.
Our game is set in the US, and I'm an English person, and I do. And our studio is based in England, and we wanted to make sure. So we got American writers. We got a couple of really great guys, Larry Fessenden and Graham Resnick, who are part of our famous film auteurs, to write great dialogue, because that's what they do, and they're really good at it. So.
We have the other problem. We're a US-based company making a game set in London, so that was actually really interesting too. There you go. See, hey, yeah. Honestly, like, writing comes from, I think, everything that we have read in so many ways. At least I think, like, for me personally, my writing has been inspired by what I've seen and I read from other people, whether it's, modern writers or classical. We used a lot of classical writing reference, for a lot of the stuff, using language and all that stuff. It is part of you. What you put on paper is going to be part of you. There's something very personal about some of the words you put out there. And at some points, you kind of divulge a little bit of yourself through the writing that you do, through the scenes that you write. And the only way for writing to matter is if it comes from a very personal space. Sometimes writing superficially will just mean that you as a player will just go like, what the hell was that? But if you write personally, you have the hope that some people will connect with that piece of you that you're putting out on paper.
Yeah, and I think for me, part of it starts with actually character backstories. I believe in trying to do as much as you can, these fleshed out character backstories for everyone, even minor characters in your game. Just filling in the stats of like where they were born or something. All this information just kind of sits in your head, and then when you go to write the scene, it's kind of like, for me, you're doing an improvisational 5-actor scene in your head. So you're kind of like improvising dialogue, but you've internalized so much of that character and the backstories that you are that character as you write their lines.
Yeah, I find it works really well to just, like Tim, write all of this stuff, but then essentially delete it all. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I make is just for the team. I'll make like comic books about all the characters, and then everyone can like feel what's going on, but that's never explained to the player. It just seeps into the way that the game is formed. because I have a bit of a sort of hatred of like too much lore in a game. I just don't care. Like, stop making me read all these strange arcane books that I keep finding everywhere. It's just dull. So, you know, I just delete all of those and get to the good stuff. So, yeah.
We are almost out of time, so maybe we can hit 2 or 3 more. I apologize. I know there's so many people waiting, but go ahead. We'll go rapid fire if we can.
It's for everybody. There's that term that came up like a year or 2 ago, ludonarrative dissonance. That kind of pissed me off. But I feel like we're getting to a point where like that's not existent anymore, and I just wanted to see like how you guys kind of like distance yourself from that kind of critique, and you know, if it stresses you out, if you're writing something and you feel like, well, is this going to get, you know, hacked on by everybody and that kind of stuff, and how we're getting to a point where that word doesn't really mean anything.
Oh boy. Yeah, you always try to make sure the writing and the gameplay fit within the context of each other. And you know, we work really hard in adjusting gameplay, adjusting writing to make sure we fit our role. But you know, games have a certain reality to them and a certain rules. And you know, in an action game, you're probably going to kill more people than you see in a film. But just like, you know, there's certain things in films that we've accepted that night shots are usually like shot day for night, and there's weird shadows that don't exist in reality, and you just kind of accept it. So for me, like, I know we've seen some of that criticism before for someone like Nathan Drake, but I don't think that way. Like when I watch Indiana Jones and he's killing a bunch of Nazis, and it's like it's a stylized reality, and it's just part of the action. It's just part of being on this escape and this fantasy. So you have to kind of find where your comfort zone is and know the tone of what it is that you're making, and kind of stick to your gut and ignore NeoGAF as much as you can.
So sorry, guys, only 2 more, so go ahead.
Hi, I had a question about basically the concept of linear stories versus branching stories. So, Neil, like, your masterpiece, The Last of Us, is being considered like, I heard that you were considering turning it into a film. And I was just thinking, like, there's so many amazing video game franchises like Mass Effect or Until Dawn that would be really incredibly difficult to encapsulate in a film because of all the branching storylines. So I was wondering, as a developer and also like as a creative, as a writer, Neil, do you ever find it frustrating that maybe you don't get to that some game designers want to explore other options throughout the story, but you want to keep like a more tight, focused kind of story? And sorry, I forgot your name, sir, from Supermassive Studios?
It's Will.
Right, sorry, Will. Will, do you ever find yourself like kind of frustrated that maybe like you feel like you have to expand on everything, or like maybe that a player will have agency over a decision that you wouldn't recommend, like as a creative, as a writer, that you wish you could sort of push them down a more focused path that you feel is more appropriate for the story?
So my background was, I used to be, years ago, as an actor, and I worked in the film industry for a while, and theatre in the film industry. And the reason I came into games is I think games, the whole medium of games is just the future of almost everything. And storytelling, storytelling in things like in movies and books is fantastic, but it's passive. And it's a story that comes at you, whereas in a game, even if it's a linear story, it's a story that you're kind of making yourself. And there's a definite thing about an emotional response in a game that you can't get any other way. And it's because it's first person, even regardless of camera. You have first-person emotion because it's what you're doing. You have that agency. Whereas in film and TV and everything else, it's always third-person, vicarious empathy rather than your own emotion. So to answer your question, I love the fact that I'm giving a player, I'll say it's a massive team of us doing this. We're giving a player all of the tools just to make a story that will be awesome. And we just want to make sure that the story itself that they get, none of it's going to be a boring one. So no, I love it. I think it's, like I say, I think it's the future. So. Yeah.
So sorry, guys. I think we actually have to cut this thing off now, and I apologize for those of you right on the bubble on the microphone. I apologize. But thank you guys so much for coming, and let's give another round of applause for all these great players. Thank you so much. Enjoy your rest of your PlayStation experience. Thanks.